Hello. We're live, right? You're on the internet watching us live, or maybe you're not, and you're here just checking us out. But my name is Bret. This is my channel. You've probably been here before. We do this live every Thursday for years and years now, and I'm glad you're back. So today is a special episode because we get to talk all about Docker the entire time, and a lot of this stuff I'm learning with you because there is a ton to talk about. Got my friend Michael on the show. We'll get to him in a minute. But real quick, just the typical promo. If you don't know, this is also a podcast. So check out below all the links. I have courses, which is how this all got started because people had questions. So we started doing this live thing for students of my courses. But you can get those coupons below. Not the Black Friday sale price, but very close to that sale price. It's still very cheap to get my courses. The podcast comes out every other week, which is an audio-only, edited-down version of this show. So if you miss some of these episodes, check it out in the podcast. I personally do chores around the house while listening to podcasts. That's my thing because I don't commute to work anymore. So I need that time. But you can check out the podcast there, all the other things. This show, by the way, is sponsored by you patrons. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to those of you sponsoring this show. So you can check that out as well as get essentially my newsletter. That's really what this is over at Patreon. The link again below. And you don't have to give me any money. The newsletter is totally free. Click the little follow button right there. You'll get basically email announcements. You can also install the app. But that all comes free. If you'd like to basically buy me a coffee every month, I'm very appreciative for that. But you get some exclusive benefits, including special channels inside our Discord server, which you can get for free right there. But the patrons get separate, an additional set of servers or channels. And one of those is our monthly hangout. And it's coming up here in the next couple of weeks, actually. But we call it the High Fivers group. And it's a lot of fun. Maybe 10 of us. It's not a ton of people. But we just are all people working in DevOps, working around in the community. And we just talk about projects we're working on, problems we're having. We look for advice. We ask others in there for advice on what we're doing. And that's a really fun group. I highly recommend it. I obviously don't miss it because I'm running it, but I would still be there even if I wasn't running it because it's a lot of fun. And I've made friends there. And we actually saw each other at KubeCon, which was great. We got a little group photo at the Kubernetes and Cloud Native Conference in Detroit. And hopefully I'll see some of you in Europe. I'm hoping to go to Amsterdam for KubeCon, Cloud Native Con. That'll be fun. So let me know in chat or in the Discord server. Again, 12,000 DevOps fans over there. Go check that out. Let us know if you're going to be at another conference. Often there's so many people in there now. There will be someone from that community at your conference, and you can hang out and talk about containers and DevOps. So enough with all that. By the way, this is the Discord server. You can go over to Discord if you don't know about that. Sign up. It's free. It's better than Slack. It's the cool place to hang out. And then we have the loot box, which we launched this year, which is all the swag. I am not wearing one of my own shirts today. I am wearing a shirt from Slim AI, which was on the show this year, making Docker images slimmer. But I have a bunch of cool stuff over there. Friends of mine work with me on the designs, and some of it's retro, some of it's new, like the Foxy stuff you recognize from courses. But yeah, go check out the merch shop over there. About once a month, we have a coupon, including right now, 15% off and free shipping if you want to get a t-shirt or a coffee mug or a hoodie or something. All right, let's get to it. Welcome to the show, Michael Irwin.
Thanks for having me, Bret.
So you've seen Michael around here before. Have you not had applause when you get on a show before? Is that new?
Oh, that may be new. Yeah.
All right. So we're both in Virginia. We are hours apart, although we have to usually go halfway around the world to see each other to a conference.
Yep,
Michael is he was first a Docker captain like me years and years ago, and then got hired by Docker recently, and is now moving into DevRel manager. What's your job responsibilities now?
Yeah. So when I started at Docker, I was an engineering manager and have kind of at the tail end of that transition now. So my official title is going to be senior manager for our DevRel team and heading up our DevRel team. So I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah. So if you're someone who's interested in, by the way, starting a Docker community, or if you're such a fan of Docker and you talk about it everywhere and you blog about it and you make videos and you just do all the things, you could be considered for the captain's program, and you can go to this guy for that. Yep. All that information, by the way, is on their website about the community stuff. But that's how we met each other, and we've been friends ever since. So I'm glad you're back. I was actually looking back. It's been a few years since you've been on the show.
It's been that long. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many people at Docker now. It's hard to keep up. Y'all are
It's true.
hiring like crazy. And this year, like once we all, there's this phenomenon. There needs to be a rule about this, like some like Occam's razor or something like that. We need something like that for this phenomena, which is, as engineers, once we learn a tool and we found the way that we want it to work for us, we tend to sort of slack off keeping up to date with all the new version stuff. We don't, everything in our lives. I've got 1,000 tools on my machine that are all getting updates all the time. Every day, Brew has a dozen updates on my Mac. There's no way to keep up. And so one of the challenges I think we all have is that we learn a tool, and within a couple of years, that tool might have completely added a ton of new functionality and useful features for you, but you're not relearning the tool because we're all on to the next thing. And that's, I think, one of the challenges with Docker, right?
Yeah, and I'll add to that too, especially with Docker's history the last couple of years when it sold off the enterprise parts, and in many ways, just keeping, in many ways, Docker went into keeping the lights on survival mode for a period of time. And now that the company's growing again, and it's actually, we've tripled in size in the last year and a half, and we've had 5 acquisitions. I mean, so there's been a lot going on. And so now the innovation wheel is spinning again.
Yeah.
And so for many people, they didn't see a lot coming out of Docker, and all of a sudden now there's a lot coming out of Docker, and it's hard to keep up with it. So yeah, it's definitely kind of an interesting position to be in at this point.
Yeah. In fact, I have this little image. Let's see if I can get this on screen. I'm stealing this from a DockerCon talk earlier this year, or maybe it was in All Hands. Let's see. Yeah, this little thing right here. This is like at a glance for just this year. It's funny how it says Docker Confidential at the bottom, but it's actually on YouTube. But, Docker loves to brag about the number of downloads because like Docker images are just a staple in the industry still on the Docker Hub. And, it's usually in the billions of downloads or whatever pulls. And, we're going to talk about some of this stuff. The Docker desktop extensions, I don't seem to have a cursor on this, so I can't really point at things. But it says here, 52 Docker desktop extensions. That's probably more now than it was in August. We have a lot of these OS-specific improvements. I'm going to just get some of this stuff out of the way because I do have these images. I'm just going to throw them up here. But this was another one talking about all of the sort of like what the extensions and the SDK for extensions are. By the way, for those of you who did not see that show, we had a show all on extensions in the summer. So back on this channel, and that's going to happen a lot for those of you watching, Mike's colleagues at Docker have been on this show multiple times this year. I mean, Docker's in the name of the show, so we got to talk about Docker at some point. But we had separate shows on this, so if you look back in this YouTube channel, just search for Docker extensions. I think it's my pick for 2022, like the feature of 2022 for Docker. However, we also have this list. Oh, wait, that's not it. This list.
There we go.
And this list is only partially complete. So we don't plan on a 3-hour live stream today. So I'm going to do a little work after this to extend this list to put some of the things that I still didn't get on this list. We're actually going to talk a little bit about the future maybe at the end there. But Michael, let's just get. I feel like we just need to jump in fast and go quick because I respect people's time and we've only got about an hour. So for those of you out there, by the way, ask questions. That's why we're doing this live. Yeah. So ask questions. We'll try to answer them as it's happening. But we're going to rapid fire, maybe a few demos, but we're going to rapid fire down the list. And if you want us to dive into something or dig a little deeper, throw it in the chat. By the way, I can share this link. You can all add comments. Please be nice. And
what could possibly go wrong with opening up a document for the entire world?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. All right. So let's get into it. So, oh, wait, I don't have this up.
Which I have to say, since you got your Patreon page there, I'm a Patreon as well for you and supporting you as well. So definitely support Bret, everybody. I'll give another shout out to him as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. By the way, these are in no particular order. I thought about making it reverse chronological so we could start from the latest stuff. This is one of the latest things, so we'll just talk about this first. If you've taken my course, you've heard me talk about artifacts. And if you've been in software long enough, especially as a developer, you know about things, JFrog, all these other artifact stores. We've had them for a while. Artifacts is like this nebulous term for things downstream. At least that's my point of view on it. Um, and we all think of Docker Hub as the place to store our Docker images, but there's all these other things. Michael, what is this really doing for us? OCI artifacts. Why does that even matter?
Yeah, good question. So, I mean, yeah, as you said, Docker Hub in many ways has been seen as the place to store container images. But as the ecosystem has grown, there's been other types of things that we want to store. So, for example, Helm charts or WASM modules, or there's lots of different types of things. OPA policies. Even years ago, and I think actually on one of my appearances on your show, we were talking about Docker app. And it was kind of this idea of, hey, let's package up a compose file and ship it as an image. But in many ways, it wasn't the typical container image. It couldn't run by itself and whatnot. So it was kind of a way to hack images to share content. And so what OCI artifacts basically allow us to do is to recognize that there are different types of things that we want to push, that we want to share, that aren't just the normal container images like Helm charts, OPA policies, et cetera. And it's part of that specification. So it allows the ability to share, distribute, pull, push, et cetera, to be fairly generic and to support lots of different types of things. And so we're pretty excited to have that support in Docker Hub. Some of the other registries have had support for a while. Of course, Docker Hub, with it being kind of the first registry, it took a while to get a lot of the internal pieces ready for it and working on it. But we're pretty excited about it. And it's going to unlock a lot of neat capabilities to be able to build and share other types of things still using Docker Hub.
Yeah, and in fact, on this blog article, I believe one of the examples is Helm. Mm-hmm. And if you're not aware, Helm is not for everyone, by the way, but it is Kubernetes specific, and it is a templating and an engine to create really complex apps in a YAML file, or well, it's always going to be many YAML files. But we don't have to keep those in registries. In Git repos, but we can also put them on registries. And there's this. I mean, if you've been around like us for a while, you've known about the struggles of using Helm first in the old mode of Helm chart pushing and pulling, and now the new OCI standard mode. And the goal here is that every registry can support Helm, and like almost like the first step. This wasn't really a Helm problem. This was a registries need to support other types of things problem, right? And so I feel like the first step, years and years ago, Helm just sort of hacked their own way to make it work. And then I don't know who helped the industry come up with the OCI artifact store standard, but that extended the registry standard so that we can all support these other things. And then Helm had to add back in OCI registry support. But then the next problem is not every registry supported it, because this is a relatively new idea. Some registries, I'm not going to name any names, but Red Hats, that doesn't always work the way you expect. And of course, Hub didn't do it at all. So it's great that we're now merging. And I wouldn't say that everything is fixed and everything is wonderful, because I imagine we got to wait for the other registries. I also use GitHub Container Registry, and it had its own issues with this over the years. I have not tested it, in the last 6 months, but there's always these weird little quirks with just simply storing a Helm chart, which is not a required workflow, by the way, people. You don't have to do this, but one common way is to store your essentially your templates for Kubernetes inside of the registry as an artifact, just like you do your images, and version them just like you do your images. And I know and have worked with many teams that have done that. Not everyone does that. You don't have to do that, especially if you're doing GitOps. You sometimes point at repos with something like Argo or Flux. But this is really cool, and I'm excited to see the other types of artifacts we all come up with. I have been voting for compose files for the longest time. Volume support, I think that was actually mentioned in this article, although we don't really I don't believe we technically have a standard for it, but at least it does work. We'll talk about extensions in a little bit, but we'll get into that.
Yeah. So again, it's kind of this idea of being able to push and share different types of content. So Helm charts, if I were setting up a Helm repo, for example, I would have to actually run a web server to serve those charts and everything, but now I can leverage all the same distribution channels I'm already using for the container images and other things. So pretty exciting stuff here.
Yeah. All right. That's one. we've
Boom.
got we've got
Done.
30 more to do. No big
Let's
deal.
do it.
All right, so that's a big deal, though it may not impact you directly today. We're gonna go down. I'm just going from the top of the list down. The next one is WASM, which we just got off a call. You were actually hosting a call where Docker was talking with the captains about WASM or WebAssembly. We should probably use the full word. This community may not even be aware of really what WebAssembly is. What's your 30-second elevator pitch on WebAssembly? Why does the industry even care?
Yeah, so typically a lot of folks have heard of WebAssembly in the use case of bringing native code into the browser. But over the last year or two, there's been more interest to take the ability to take these binary formats and run them in other locations, because WebAssembly runs in a pretty secure sandbox environment, and those modules are portable. And so how can we leverage a lot of the learnings and whatnot that come from WebAssembly and now run them in other locations, other use cases? So it's still a pretty early technology, early capability, and I'm not suggesting everybody just go and rewrite all their applications and start running them in WebAssembly. But what we're wanting to do at Docker is to be part of the conversation. And again, just like we were talking about with the OCR artifact support, how can we leverage a lot of the tools and the things that developers are already using for this new technology? We think the containers and WebAssembly modules are complementary. They work together. They are different technologies, of course. WebAssembly is fast and portable and lightweight and everything, and we can spend another show talking about it as well. And I think you've got one coming up soon too. So, but yeah, so we're pretty excited to be able to support WebAssembly and running it directly in Docker.
Yeah. By the way, I'm replying to some people in chat. So if you're asking questions, I'm putting some answers in there. Yeah, I mean, to me, WebAssembly is like let me ask this real quick, because I'm saving my learning for the actual episode I'm going to have with Nigel Poulton. We're going to have by the way, there's a future episode. We're going to have Nigel talking about Docker and WASM, and I'm basically going to act like the noob student, because I am a new student. I've not used WebAssembly before this, because it's mostly been a front end thing, and I'm not really a front end developer. I'm still a pretend developer on all levels. So on the front end, I've never had performance problems because the apps I make personally are not that fast, aren't that complicated. Sure. So I understand, like, the lower that we compile all of our apps down to, closer and closer to assembly and all the way into the bytecode, that's just going to reap performance benefits all the time. However, us as humans haven't always liked to write those low-level codes, and so we've always made up new higher level languages. We continue to make up new higher level languages. However, sometimes that comes at a performance cost, right? Yep. And so I had a conversation earlier with someone that was like, I'm still not even sure why I would need WebAssembly on the back end. And that's, I think, what the industry, like you're saying, the industry is still trying to figure this out, right? What are the good use cases for WASM? It's, I think you and I don't know if you were at the Kelsey Hightower thing with Scott at KubeCon, but there was basically this little hangout with the CEO of Docker and Kelsey Hightower from Google, and they were sort of talking about WebAssembly and containers, and Kelsey had a really good mindset, like he always does, a really healthy, non-fanatic, non-buzzworthy sort of thought process, where he was saying, that we've all established this workflow of containers being the deployment object. It's the artifact. We have all of our CI and CD pipelines are all revolving around containers now. It's assumed in cloud native that you're using containers in most cases, and we don't need to throw all that away just because we're compiling down to a different file type. And obviously there's a little more to WASM than that, because you need an executor and all that. But he was really breaking it down to saying, like, if the developer chooses to make a WASM app, why should the entire ops and DevOps chain and the build chain, why should all those things completely change? They probably shouldn't. And so the idea that Docker can provide us a way, at least today, to package it up in an image and then in the future run it hopefully in Kubernetes and other places, just like another container, that sounds perfect to me. Like, that's exactly what I would want as a DevOps person.
Yep.
So
and that's pretty much exactly what we announced with the technical preview, and maybe I can do a quick little demo of that as well too, and just show off. And again, we'll save a lot of the juicy bits for your future show. But so let's go ahead and pull up my demo here. So I've got a compose file here. And maybe I'll zoom in once here. There we go. That's a good size there. I've got a compose file here in which I've got an Nginx normal container. I'll come back to this, the server one here. And then I've got a database container here, and this is just running MariaDB. So my database and client here are just normal containers. This server is actually a WebAssembly application here, in which what I'm doing is I'm building a container image here, and I'll look at the Docker file. Again, we won't go into juicy details here, but this particular application is using Rust, and so it's setting up all the Rust packages and dependencies, et cetera. It's going to compile, do some optimization of it. But in this multi-stage build, the final stage here is doing a from scratch, and we're basically copying out the compiled WASM application, and that's all that's in the final image here. And in fact, actually, let's see if this works. Oh, okay, I don't have it built with a name right now, but the final container image is only about 3 megabytes in size. That's the size of this entire WASM application that has an HTTP server, and this particular app is connecting to MySQL and everything. So with the HTTP server, the source code, the MySQL connector and everything, to have an entire application about 3 megabytes, that's hard to beat. And so what's happening in this compose file is, all right, we're going to build that. We're specifying this WASM platform, which one of the cool things, again, about WebAssembly is I don't have to now compile for ARM64 and AMD64 and all the different architectures I might be leveraging, because the WebAssembly format itself is portable. And when I run this, I specify a runtime. And what that's going to do is it changes a little bit how the application runs. And we've got this on the technical preview docs and the blog and everything. But basically what's going to happen is instead of running this as a normal container, that WASM module is extracted out and then dropped onto a WASM runtime. And that's how it runs. And so the cool thing here is that just with just a little bit of extra config, I can run full WASM applications here, and they network the same way as a normal container. I can still talk to my database, and my application can work. And as an example here, I can curl against that endpoint, and I could see a bunch of orders come back, and that Rust service, sorry, the Rust application that's been compiled to WebAssembly is talking to the database and giving us all the information there. So again, just like you're saying, the whole idea here is let's leverage all the tooling and the capability and the workflows and the processes that developers already know and love for now a slightly different technology, without the developers having to understand under the hood how it's all working. So yeah, we're pretty excited about it. Again, it's still early days in the technology, but we're excited to be able to help out in this space.
Yeah, and inside that image,
yep,
is it a single binary? Like if I actually inspected that image, what would be in it?
Yeah, so if this final image here, since I'm starting from scratch, for those that don't know, from scratch means literally I'm starting from scratch, from nothing. And if I were to look at this image, the only thing that's in this image is this compiled WASM binary. And that's the only thing that's there. So I'm going to be shipping this around. Eventually, this might become an OCI artifact
type. So like a different type.
Yeah, it's its own artifact type. Yep. But we started some of these demos before the full artifact support was in place. So, yeah.
I mean, so here's the thing for me. Here's like the sales pitch for me to teams that are even thinking about this or even curious. I'm talking from specifically from an ops and a DevOps standpoint, because I'm not usually advising the developers on how to architect the internals of their app or whether they should go WASM or not, right? I'm usually the person that's trying to optimize their build chain, their speed up their deployment times, reduce the size of their images, reduce the security of their images. So when I think of something like a Node.js app or a Ruby app, which are they're easy languages to write in. They have lots of functionality and lots of dependencies. Usually, you usually have a ton of dependencies. And if it would be possible for me to ship those as a single binary file, rather than, I have Ruby apps that I've seen that are 2 gig, full of dependencies and vulnerabilities and just hundreds, if not thousands, of vulnerabilities in there. And if I can package all that down into a binary, not even include a shell, not include any system utilities that might be vulnerable. Granted, it doesn't mean that there's not vulnerabilities in my code, but it means that it's going to be a lot harder for someone to exploit that if it's all inside of a WASM binary than it is if it's just the open SSL version or whatever, whatever the latest hack is, the latest curl vulnerability. And I love that. I think that's one of the reasons I would advocate for Golang or Rust or something like these modern languages that assume, or not assume, but at least provide a very easy path to build you a single little tiny binary that you can distribute. I feels like what this does is this gives that ability to all the ecosystems that WebAssembly supports without each own ecosystem having to build their own specific build chain and tooling and process for all of that stuff. I don't know. Does that sound like a viable argument?
Yeah, I mean, and that's certainly one major aspect of it too. And I would say even the security model even goes beyond that, because, for example, in the browser, when a WebAssembly module runs, it only has access to the things that the browser gives it access to. So like it can't access the file system. It can't do a lot of different things. And there's a whole mechanism there called WASI. It's the WebAssembly Systems Interface. And again, at the end of the day, the module only has access to the things that it's been given access to. And so when you're running in these WASM runtimes, you can limit how much control or how much touch points to the underlying host and even the network and all these different things. So you can lock it down in ways that you actually can't even do with traditional Unix containers. So there's a really interesting security model that goes along there. Again, leveraging a lot of the lessons learned when it was originally built and developed for the browser environment. So there's still a lot of evolution that needs to occur, but yeah, it's pretty exciting stuff there. And I saw Mark's comment show up on the screen there of saying security wise, it's more compelling than Unix containers. And again, I think it's that sandboxing environment and that WASI, that systems interface is makes it quite locked down there. For sure.
Yeah, Marcos, another Docker captain, maker of Play with Docker. You've probably played with his tools over at Dagger now, which we're probably going to have Dagger on the show next year if I have anything to say about it. A CI conversation. We have to have a testing and deployment conversation with Marcos and the team. But yeah, I think that, I don't know what these rules look like. That'll be maybe part of the WASM episode. How low level and complex is this? Because that's one of the struggles for developers is always, I would love to be able to fine grain control the security of my app, but I don't understand all these tools, seccomp, kernel features, app armor, SE Linux. There's just you name it all. You go down this list, and there's just a staggering amount of complexity all of a sudden. And so most developers, they just don't do it, right? They're gonna only do it when it becomes a functionality problem for their app. And like you said, even though containers run with less security privileges than a regular app on Linux, which is one of my arguments for containers in general, is that they automatically reduce the functionality capable for an individual app. But at the same time, it's still very much you have to opt out of things, right? There's still very much, you have to enable seccomp. You have to manually do that in Kubernetes. At least today you do. There's all this other stuff. So I love this idea of a universal security boundary that we can all maybe wrap our hands around and comprehend. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. And again, I don't want to get too far down, but there's some interesting performance improvements that even come if I'm running multiple WASM modules in the same runtime, and if I need to communicate between them. Traditionally, when processes communicate with other processes, you're having to, either pipe things between it or, create files, and there's a lot of memory copies and everything that's going on. But when you're leveraging the same runtime and a lot of the sandboxing that goes along there, you can start to do things like shared memory, and there's just a lot of really cool things that provide a lot of really neat performance benefits. A lot of this is still being developed and still being evolved within the WebAssembly space. But I'll admit, when I went to the WASM day at KubeCon, because I'm still ramping up in this space as well, my mind was blown just at the number of things that are going on, and the performance improvements, the component models, all these different things. There's some really cool architectures that are coming our way. So pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we're gonna remember you all, if you're interested in WebAssembly and Docker more, we're gonna have a future episode in December about that. At least that's the plan. So stay tuned. Jump on there. The Patreon is, you can get from there, or you can just go below and find the Patreon link, and you will get my email about who's going to be on the show and who's going to be on the podcast every week. So jump on that stuff if you want to know about the upcoming stuff. Or jump on the Discord server, where I also list. They have an event system now in Discord, so you can list a calendar of things that are going on. And in our Discord server right now, it's actually saying we're live, and then you can see that it's pretty neat in there. Anyway, so I want to answer some questions real quick, but we're going to get to extensions. So stick around for extensions for a second. We're going to talk about those. It's not our first time on this show talking about extensions. It's probably the 100th time just this year. But I want to show off some new advancements, and we'll talk about some new extensions. But real quick, for those of you asking questions, I know you've been patient. Thank you. Yazwant, sorry if I mispronounced that, but you're asking about a live stream where I can work on a real project. I save a lot of that stuff for my courses. So if you are interested in that, you can get a very deep discount on any of my courses where I do a bunch of project work with you, showing you those in lectures. That stuff's below. If you're asking for me to do a live stream for free on YouTube about it, that is not in the plan, but I like the idea, and I'll think more about it and see if we can't come up with something for 2023, because we're already booked out on this show for the next couple of months. But let's see, what else? What happens after we create a Docker image? What are the different things that we can achieve other than creating pods out of it? Okay, so you really just containers. That's really the focus of images right now. You can use Docker export to technically turn it into files on your host file system, or put it into a tarball, and it's just a bunch of files, really, what's in an image. But I mean, that's the reason you use images, you build images, is to run containers, whether that's in a Kubernetes pod or a Docker Compose file, or however you want to run your containers. Every cloud now has dozens of ways to run containers. So you can run them in functions. If you want to do serverless, you can do functions in it with a Docker image. So lots of ways to do that.
Maybe I'll jump in there. So it's been interesting to see all the different use cases of running containers that are beyond just the traditional, I'm going to run this app in production or something like that. In fact, a couple years ago, I was working with a friend of mine who's an accounting professor, and he knows how to write a little bit of code. He's like, I wrote this Python script that ingests an Excel document and then goes out to the Stock Exchange Commission and gets a lot of data, generates this report, and hooray, I can output some stuff. How do I share that with my colleagues who aren't nerdy, who don't know how to do everything? I'm like, I have an answer for you. And so we containerized it, and we made just a little Windows batch file because everybody's running Windows, and dropped the CLI command. And so he created this container image, and all of his colleagues installed Docker Desktop, and they would just double click this little batch file, and it would mount in the spreadsheet and kind of go from there. So he was using images to basically share here's a little application and the runtime that application needs, not with the intent of, hey, I'm going to run this in production, but it's just a little utility script that I'm going to share with my friends. And images and containers made that portable and allowed him to be able to share it with his friends. It was pretty awesome use case. And we're starting to see more and more of that kind of stuff where, hey, I want to share something with my friends that isn't going to be running in production in Kubernetes or ECS or whatever. So let us know if you have use cases like that. I'd love to hear them as well.
Yeah. There's a little bit of a related question. Jonathan's asking, do you plan to support other types of containers besides WASM? And I asked, what would we be thinking? And Jonathan replied, no simple binaries like Nomad does. So a system service, Mike can answer this, but that's not a container. So, Docker is containers. So it would, I don't know.
Well, and so I think one of the things that we're trying to also do with this WebAssembly thing is kind of be known more than just the container company, that we're a developer tooling company. And so, we can, because at the end of the day, the way you run Linux containers looks different than the way you run Windows containers. And so now these WebAssembly containers, they're all different runtimes, but it all provides the same interface, the same abstraction that developers are working with. So as of today, we're working and looking at WebAssembly, but down the road, who knows? There may be other types of things that we might look at. Nothing that I know about and can announce today, kind of thing. But But who knows? As the ecosystem continues to grow, if there's other types of runtimes, especially this container shim, that's really how we're doing this. As there's other runtimes that the ecosystem builds out, we might certainly look at how do we fold those in and make it easier for developers to use. So.
Yeah, that's a good point, by the way. And we should mention this because it's not a Docker specific thing, but Containerd has mini shims
Yeah.
for extra functionality in Containerd. You may not be able to access it from the Docker command line. You might have to look into Containerd itself. But Docker, in essence, it uses Containerd underneath it. Kubernetes uses Containerd to run its containers by default nowadays. I mean, you can still use Docker D, you can still use Cryo, but Containerd I think is becoming the standard, the sort of the default answer for Kubernetes. Yep. And it has things where you can run full VMs, you can run encrypted, you can have encrypted images, you can do all these things in Containerd now because it has that plugin model. There's actually a separate question we had here around. I'm confused from the past 2 years. Should I use Docker with Kubernetes after acquired by Mirantis? Most of the industry changing their containers to use Containerd. Can you please talk about it?
Ooh. Okay. So there's a couple different things that I think are mixed in there. So when Docker sold off the enterprise pieces to Mirantis, what that basically was is all of the operations pieces. So Docker, earlier days of Docker was trying to do too many things, and it was hard to focus. And so, we were doing developer tooling, we were doing build systems, we were doing, here's a managed Kubernetes and Swarm service and registries, and there was just too much going on, and it ended up having us, we started competing against big names that we just couldn't compete with. Mm-hmm. And so decided, hey, let's go back to the roots, let's go back to the developer tooling. And so they sold off those, we say the enterprise pieces, are really more the operations and registry and that kind of stuff, and refocus back on the developer tooling. So if you need an operations tooling and management system, Mirantis still sells their services, and it's a great product as well. And there's lots of other products out there as well too. As far as the swap to Containerd from Docker, that's actually been something that's been years in the making. And it was largely a marketing buzz and, oh my goodness, Docker shims being removed from Kubernetes. Well, Docker actually started that when they spun out the container engine and made Containerd in the first place, because recognize, hey, not every system, every environment needs to build the ability to build images and to do everything that the Docker engine has. A lot of environments just need the ability to pull and run containers. That's it. And that's, at the end of the day, what Containerd is designed to do. Sure, it's got that plug-in mechanism and whatnot, but and so the swap for Kubernetes use Containerd is something that's been in the works for years, and it just now has rolled out. Because again, when you're running Kubernetes in a production environment, you want to minimize your security footprint and the things that might happen. So, just run containers, use Containerd.
Yeah. If you're someone, I will add to that and say that if you're someone who maybe you're still using a traditional, I would say traditional because there's lots of other tools now to build images, but a traditional build situation where you want to build in Kubernetes and Containerd doesn't do that. Again, there's lots of other options, but a traditional way was to put Docker in there. We all started with Docker D as our container runtime because we didn't have any other ones that, back when Kubernetes started. And even just looking at on the Kubernetes website, you can see on the list of runtimes, the Mirantis container runtime, which is, to me, it's functionally equivalent to the Docker D, because the core of Docker daemon is the Moby project. That's open source. Mirantis builds that and relabels it as their own runtime, and they do support that shim. So if you're someone who you think there's features in Docker that I need in my Kubernetes for some reason, even though a lot of us are moving to Containerd, if you have a good reason for Docker D, maybe there's some edge case scenario, or maybe you want to build with the same runtime that does other things. Maybe that's your setup. So you can still do that. You would technically, in the newer versions of Kubernetes, you would need to remove Docker D, but then you would just add back in the Mirantis container runtime, which is functionally equivalent. It's the same core code. And you would have to hook that into Kubernetes, and there's basically a document here on how to do that. You would install that with the shim that now Mirantis is supporting. It used to be a community effort. Now Mirantis has volunteered to support that open source. So it's not that you can't run the Docker engine. It's just, it's now maintained by Mirantis. It's called something different, but it's the exact same stuff that you would use local Docker run with. And it does work. I've tested it. It's just most of us have evolved to other tools so that we don't need a very large runtime on our Kubernetes clusters, and we save that Docker runtime for local use, or for human use, I guess I would say. Anyway, yeah, so we had a lot of episodes on that. Actually, we've had multiple full long episodes. If you're still very curious about why all that happened, if you want the backstory from Justin Carmack himself, who's the CTO of Docker, he was on this show a couple years ago when that announcement came out. So go back and search this channel on YouTube, and you'll probably find those episodes. But that's a great question. All right, let's get to extensions. I'm excited about this one. All right, so extensions. I'm just going to show it because if you haven't seen it, got to find where my button there is. If you haven't seen extensions, I think we could explain it for 5 minutes, or I could just visually show you what it looks like. So in your Docker GUI, this is a Docker desktop only thing. In your Docker GUI, you have this little extensions list down here now. It starts empty, and it's your job to go into the marketplace. By the way, there's a marketplace now. You can even view it on the web. All this is on Hub, so another artifact type on Hub, I suppose. And there are all these different options here. I think we're, I don't know, like close to 60 or something, or 70? I don't even know what you're at now.
I don't know what the current number is.
Yeah, in fact, I didn't update to 4.50. We just got a new release of Docker Desktop today, and I have not installed it. So I'm technically on an older version. But you can see there's all this stuff in here, and it's incredible what you can do in here. Honestly, they asked us captains, I think back when you were still a captain, or it's not a Docker employee, and we were all like, they were asking us for ideas, and we came up with a couple. But I could have not made up this massive list of, adding vCluster, who's been on this show, which allows you to have virtual Kubernetes within inside of Kubernetes. It's actually pretty amazing. Running a OpenShift server inside of Docker Desktop, you can do that. Installing Slim AI or running Lens inside here. I wouldn't even think that you would want to do that, but you can. There's just telepresence. There's all this stuff in here. Developer tools, CI tools, deployment. There's just a ton. Each one of these could deserve their own episode. However, Docker makes a few official ones, and that's what I have some of them here. One of the big recent feature releases is adding the resource usage, which you can kind of tell that Docker's kind of themed theirs with this little blue icon. So I can now see more detailed resource usage of what's going on, and you can see I'm using 17 mega RAM. I have 2 containers running right now because I only have one project. You can see up here I only have one compose file running with 2 apps. So not a lot of resource usage, but you get all these interesting stats. You get charts in here, and there's just, it goes on and on and on and on. The one that I'm kind of excited about was something that I had the idea for a few years ago. I wrote a shell script, and then the Docker team actually took it and ran with it and made it so much better as a Docker extension, where you can now back up and restore Docker volumes on your local machine, and you can even clone your local Docker volumes to a remote Docker server, which is also amazing. There's just a lot going on here. So if you haven't checked out extensions, we've had the extension show. You can go back and watch it. We demoed some of them, even like just simple little tools like Trivy, which you could normally run from the command line. But when you run it here, it gives you an image. It gives you, stuff to look at rather than just a command line of text. So there's Sneak's got a tool in here as well. There's lots of other security stuff. I chose the wrong image because there's maybe no vulnerabilities in Alpine. So there's only one. Yeah. So yay, Alpine. You keep us safe.
Right.
So there's a ton here. Again, I don't know if you have anything to say about it, Michael, but
it's just been fun to watch the ecosystem take and run with the idea. The fact that anybody can build extensions. I made a fun little game which keeps getting brought up in the captains group quite a bit, called Flappy Doc. Just like Flappy Bird, but it's Moby and Molly, and so I mean you can really build anything as an extension, and it's fun to see again what's traditionally been difficult CLI based interactions now have a GUI based interaction, and it opens up a lot of these capabilities to folks that may not be quite as familiar or comfortable in the CLI. And I think in many ways we're still at the start of the capabilities that will come along with this. So I'm excited to see what 2023 is going to bring in this space too. Oh, looks like you're muted.
Yeah, I'm muted. I'm replying to I was actually replying in chat, but I'll just say it. So one of the questions was, who should care about WASM images? My answer there is, at this time, only cutting edge developers.
Yeah.
It's a pretty new thing. It's not new in the browser, but it's a new idea around putting it everywhere on servers and on the back end. So I would say that if you're not the main developer in the team or whatever, like, those people are probably going to know about any new security requirements that the security team is giving them, that they may have to go to something like WASM to do. They might have a mandate to do it, sort of an organizational wide, let's lock things down or improve performance if they've got performance problems, and WASM in maybe a more traditional language, like I was mentioning, Node.js or Ruby or something where the performance isn't as expected, but bundling or building it down into WASM gives you all that performance advancements that you might get with things that in more modern languages that already compile into a binary. So that's at least on my very limited understanding of it. As a DevOps person or an ops person, I'm not going to drive that boat. I'm going to wait on the devs to tell me they want to use WASM, and then I'll learn how to support it. I'll learn how to have our build chains or servers support WASM. But.
Yeah. And I'd agree with that as well too. I mean, it's still pretty early days. I mean, so definitely feel free to play and experiment with it. Am I going to personally go and rewrite all my applications, into WASM? Probably not yet. But I'm probably going to experiment and just poke around with it a little bit. I'll add one other use case that we've seen quite a bit is systems that are wanting to add like plugin architectures to their system. So for example, Envoy Service Mesh, they're adding the ability to extend the service mesh and to kind of run code within the service mesh. And basically they're running a WASM runtime, and they say, hey, if you want to listen to events or, extend our system, here's the interface to do so. And so then allows developers that want to plug into that, they can write their extensions, these plugins in a variety of different languages, any language that can output the WASM, and then Envoy can ingest that. So that's a very different use case than, hey, I'm going to run my application in straight up WebAssembly, but that's a growing use case that we're starting to see more and more of as well too. So, yeah.
Sorry, I'm typing. It's hard to push buttons and typing at the same time.
No, you're fine. Yeah, I've seen some stuff show up in chat too.
So one of the questions was, Kevin was asking, when would you need to install extensions? So I just sent the list. Like, you can actually just go look in the Docker Hub. They now have, when you want to search for things in Docker Hub, they now have 3 options. The images was the first thing. We all had the images. Mm-hmm. Plugins has been around a long time, but that's for Docker plugins, specifically to the Docker engine or command line or whatever. I'm not sure exactly which one that is, or both. But then there's extensions. And that's what we're talking about here. This is for Docker Desktop. It's GUI extensions that will, in the background, they actually run a container, and then they present a bunch of and usually they present an interface. I don't know if we have any GUI-less ones, but look at all these. There's just, everything that you could possibly think of, I guess, for local dev. There's just tons and tons of stuff here. So I would say look through this list for the tools you already use today, and see if they have an extension. Ufizzy allows you to spin up temporary staging environments, basically, or proof of concept environments, right? With a one-line UART kind of thing. But now you can do it straight inside the GUI. Octeto also does dev environments. So you can spin up dev environments remotely and use them locally, like they were actually on your machine, but you're actually using a remote cluster. There's just a ton here. Portainer, which we've all known from like Swarm and Docker days, and now it supports Kubernetes. It's one of, I think, the most popular. You heard, I think you were talking today about the number of installs or something, and Portainer had a lot.
Yeah, so actually in the Docker Desktop release that came out earlier today, when you open up the extensions marketplace, it actually will display how many installs a particular extension has had, and you can sort by most installed. And so Portainer's, right at it's not the very top of the list. It's actually kind of funny that disk usage one that you were showing off earlier. I think that's the number one, and it's funny too because we built that internally as more just like a demo of kind of, hey, here's what's capable with the SDK, and it's ended up being the number one favorite so far. So we've kind of been surprised by it.
Yeah. Just being able to search logs in the GUI, or look at stats of a container, that kind of stuff. We all, if you've been around long enough, we had other GUIs in the past that did this. but none of them were like native built into the Docker desktop product. So this is actually pretty great. And it like a lot of ideas at Docker, it just started out with an idea at the team. They just were like, well, what if we could allow other people to extend and enhance our Docker desktop system? And it's actually turned out to be quite useful. Newman, I think, is one of the newest ones on there, is for running Postman. If you're a web developer and you've got to use, probably have heard of Postman, you probably use Postman, but now you don't have to necessarily do it all separately. You can do it right inside the GUI there with Docker Desktop. And you can uninstall and reinstall these. There's version updates. You have to do all that kind of stuff as well. And Docker continues to enhance all this so that it's easier to use them. And, because we're now getting to the point where I have to actually clean my extension list out because I'll end up having too many running, and I need to keep it small. Maybe that's a feature request. Is there an ability to just temporarily disable it without installing it? I don't know if that's a feature.
I don't think there is today, but
yeah, because some of them, like opening up or running an OpenShift cluster, I don't always want that, but I also don't necessarily just want to uninstall the extension every time. So, all right, next on the list, let's talk about dev environments. Now, we've talked about dev environments before on this show back, I don't know, it was last year maybe, or the year before maybe, when it first showed up. It's been a couple of years. I was actually looking up maybe the dev homepage. I don't know if there was one, maybe something to show on screen. But what's the elevator pitch on this?
So Docker dev environments are the ability for us to build, share, and kind of run an entire development environment. So traditionally, if I needed to, if I was wanting to share my application environment with the rest of my team, they'd have to git clone, Docker compose up, whatever else from there. And so the dev environments allows us to kind of import a project, and you can kind of just say, here's the project, and it will import it. And then I can also open up basically one of those containers in VS Code and make changes to the files using my IDEs. And you can continue to package up and share the application. As it shows here, it's in beta format, beta format. It's still in a beta stage for us, and so we're still looking to evolve and iterate the feature set as well too. And so actually the items that you have on the Google Doc drive, this year we were working on adding a CLI, because once you've got a CLI, then other tools can maybe start to integrate with it, and we can start to build more of an ecosystem around it, rather than if it's just embedded within kind of some proprietary, or you have to click the certain buttons in the user interface, et cetera. So it gives us some better extension points to be able to do things with. So looks like you're gonna show it off for us here.
No, I wasn't. I was just pulling it up. So for those curious, you look in the GUI, but also that's one of the, like you're saying, one of the new things this year, Docker dev as a command line. You can do Docker dev create to create a new dev environment from a URL. You can actually, I don't know what one of the other, that's one of the new things was you can use a GitHub URL to create a new, sort from a template, essentially a dev environment template. And then there's this new compose dev YAML, which I don't know anything about. Is that in the docs?
Yeah, it's more or less still just a normal. I mean, it's a normal compose file. Just the dev environment is looking for a different default name for the file to use. So that way you can have a compose file for if I'm going to spin it up in a dev environment versus a non-dev environment. Again, as we're experimenting and playing with the dev environment tooling, we don't want to just all of a sudden kind of pull the rug out from everybody and say, hey, you've got to change things out. So it's looking for a different file name for right now.
Yeah. Okay. And there's all this documentation on the Docker docs. So for those that are interested more in this, there's obviously built in right inside of Docker Desktop, and that'll probably take you to the docs. You can also just search the dev environments on the docs. It took me a minute, honestly, to it's sort of like when I first learned Docker, it took me a long time to actually really understand what even is it doing? Why do I even need this? This is one of those things where I think it'll catch on as people try it and then understand what its use cases are a little bit better, so that you can see, oh, can my team take advantage of this? Because sometimes this is just a solution to the ability for you to collaborate with your team when your team maybe doesn't have great development collaboration tools, right? I feel like that's one of the opportunities for this, but you may have other tools that you've already built. I worked with a team last year that looked at this, but they had such advanced collaboration features for their developers to share projects with each other and do all this stuff that they found out that they didn't necessarily need it in its current iteration. But like you're saying, it keeps getting new features, it keeps getting enhancements. So we might see more in the future on this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I wish I had a demo for that, but we don't. We had this demo like a year ago or whenever it got announced. So again, I hate to keep saying this, but look back on the channel for a whole episode on it.
Exactly. Yeah, we'll have to have a whole show on that one too.
One of the other things that I'm not going to demo, but we've had at least two shows in the last year on the new Compose V2. So for those on the podcast that are listening to the audio only on this, if you're using Docker dash Compose today, just take out the dash and put in a space. You will then get suddenly a new version of Compose rebuilt from scratch in Golang instead of Python. And it's bundled now, not just with Docker Desktop, but also with the Docker, well, it's a separate apt install. So like if you're using apt or yum, but you can now get it on servers easier than you used to be able to, because before on servers we would all have to use pip and other things if we wanted Compose. And now it's an easier way to install. It's automatically bundled like before, but it's faster. I think they shaved off hundreds of milliseconds on every command or something. It's the only way I use Compose now, for years. So if you're not familiar, check out Compose V2. Same command line.
And I'll say one of the other things we're kind of excited about too is, since it's all written in Go now, theoretically anybody could leverage the same parsers and packages and that kind of stuff that we're using to build other tools and whatnot on top of Compose as well. So we've seen a couple people kind of dabble with that a little bit, but it definitely opens up some more extensibility capabilities than compared to when it was all just a Python code base.
Yeah, so if I do a Docker Compose with a dash version, I'm not even sure if that'll, Oh, you know what? I'm aliasing it.
Yeah, it's got an alias.
Because I'm creature of habit. You can set it up in Docker to alias this as well. And I think maybe if you have a new install today, I think they also do this. So a lot of you may not even realize that you're using the new version. You may be typing in the dash, but if you see that V2 there in the version number, you know you're using the new version. And it's technically a space, but there's probably some sort of alias set up there for me. Yeah. So that's great, and it keeps getting better. There are actually new commands, like the PS or the LS command rather. There's increasing number of enhancements that are being added to the new version, and it's now official GA. That's the big news for this year. Is we can safely use it and know that the major bugs have been squashed and that the team is that's where all the future effort is going. So if you want to stay up with the latest in Docker Compose, you have to be using this new V2 stuff. All right. Hardened desktop. So hardened Docker desktop. There was a blog post about this a ways back this year. Just going to pull it up. So there was a couple of announcements, but one of them was this hardened desktop mode. To me, what this really is all about is for those of us that have ever had to manage IT infrastructure. I mean, I come from the world of Active Directory and group policy and managing 7,000 desktops and 1,000 servers all through Microsoft Windows interfaces. That was a long time ago, over a decade ago. But one of the big things that we were always concerned with was how do we manage the policy for developer tools, because they were always the hardest users to manage because they often wanted local admin. They usually would need it to run things like Hyper-V or VirtualBox or whatever. They had very specific dev tools, and we would often provide those to them. And then we would sort of have to loosen up the restrictions that they would have versus a normal user. And so one of the challenges over the years is that in really secure environments, large enterprises that are very concerned about the security of their massive amounts of developers, tens, hundreds, thousands of developers, they will often set policies specifically to the dev group. And the one thing that this does that I really like, which isn't really related to the locking down specifically, but the first step was, let's get centralized settings management. So this blog article talks about the settings management of using a JSON file to centrally control Docker Desktop for Windows and Mac, and now I guess Linux, all from a JSON file. And then one of those features happens to be this enhanced container isolation feature, which you can optionally enable. Do you know anything about this? Because I
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah. So in many ways, what it's doing is allowing rootless container mode, and there's a lot kind of behind the scenes and that kind of stuff. But so yeah, running root inside of a container isn't running root on in the Docker VM, and so it's definitely designed for the organizations that need that greater enhancement and don't
Mhm.
want to be handing out root access. Because, like, for example, um, there's nothing really stopping me, assuming that I have my settings set up, I can mount my entire host directory inside of a container. And if I'm running root now, I can really change almost any file on my file system and make adjustments to that. But now with this container isolation, it prevents that sort of mechanism to be root inside the container, because root inside the container is not root on the host. And
Mhm.
it just provides greater levels of protection and isolation for those environments that need it.
Yeah. And we're not going to see that inside the GUI ourselves, right? Like this is a setting that's done in the JSON file that's controlled by a central administrative authority. Um, and this is a
So
specific
yeah,
business feature too, right? Like you have to pay for this is a part of
yeah.
the
So
paid plans.
so all of the hardened desktop features here are part of the Docker Business subscription. Um, you can, if your organization isn't using settings management, isn't setting okay, we're going to do container isolation in a centralized manner, it is available as a checkbox, and you can enable, disable it, and whatnot. But if your organization is managing those settings, then that checkbox is disabled, and you can't modify the setting there. So, um, yep. And so, yeah, actually, if you scroll down just a little bit, it'll highlight the four different areas that. So, hardened desktop is kind of like an umbrella term for a couple
Mm,
different features. So yeah, settings management, then enhanced container isolation, and then like registry access management, image access management. Those have been around for a little bit, but not too long.
yeah.
Um, and so again, for those organizations, for example, registry access management, a lot of organizations will say, "Hey, we don't want to allow developers to pull from Docker Hub. We're going to run our own internal registry, and we're going to set policy to say, hey, you can't pull images from Docker Hub. You can only pull it from our internal registry that contains images that we've vetted and validated and approved. And so those are the base images you can use, et cetera. So registry access management supports that use case. And what so image access management is a similar mechanism, but it's for what sorts of images can you pull from Docker Hub. We can only pull official images or verified publisher images, et cetera. So
Yeah. The this is actually something that I've been hearing. Those some of us were back in the day. Docker had a security conference for government, specifically in the United
Mhm.
States, and there would always be a lot of questions and concerns around. Well, if I install this locally, what am I opening myself up to? It
Yep.
sounds like I have to have a lot of privileges, and how can the security team see in, control or even see into a lot of the internals and what's happening? Because it essentially, having Docker pull, Docker run, you can really run whatever you want if it's an image, and
Yep.
so we would all get a lot of questions over time around how do I limit, how do I restrict, how do I control all this, and I think this is a great step in that direction. I really think that once more people know about this, there
Yeah.
will probably be more teams that they'll implement this kind of tool into something like Active Directory group policy, and they'll have this JSON
Mhm.
file come down to all the systems and really limit things like saying, hey, the only way you can run images is from our image registry, not from Docker
Yep.
Hubs or whatever. Like there's
Yep.
a lot of policies that especially like financial companies, banks I've worked with, they're always trying to figure out a way, you know, DNS blocking, like all sorts of levels of proxying, and
Yep.
just trying to really prevent developer from being able to literally run everything on the internet on their local machine.
Yeah.
So that's really great to see. All right, we're going to do some rapid fire because we
Oh,
are running
oh
close
my
on
goodness.
time.
Look at that time. Yeah.
Yeah. So next up is Tilt. So Docker bought Tilt. Docker bought the company that makes Tilt or started
Mhm.
making this open source project.
Yep.
And I'm just going to preface it. I'm just going to sort of elevator pitch it, saying that it is an advanced local tool with a web GUI and a config file for when maybe Compose isn't enough.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a sales point of if Compose is great for you, keep on doing Compose. But if you need, maybe you're doing 30 or 40 microservices and you need infinite micro control of which ones are happening at the same time, even though we've got tons of new features in Compose to do that for you, the Tilt app is another way to kind of do that. And it provides you this web GUI that maybe is I don't know, maybe a little bit different or more enhanced than the new Docker desktop GUIs that we get. So there's a lot of overlap here, but I think that for a certain amount of people, and Tilt's not new; it's been around a while. My understanding is it's not built into Docker desktop yet, but stay tuned. There might be things in the future we don't know.
Yeah,
right?
and Tilt was really designed for Kubernetes development environment. So if you're in a shop that tries to run Kubernetes locally and you're going to do your development out of Kubernetes, et cetera, Tilt helps do that. So for example, if I want to, you can set up Tilt to watch a directory, and whenever I make changes, go ahead and auto rebuild the container image and update the deployment to roll out that image into my Kubernetes cluster. So it provides
cool.
a lot of those kind of nice development integrations with Kubernetes, and tries to make that experience at least a little bit better. And it's a pretty awesome tool to do that.
Yeah. So check out Tilt if you have that kind of complexity, and stay tuned. So the next one is Docker Desktop for Linux, which we had an entire show on this year. But the short answer there is Linux desktop users get love now too. And for years, Docker has been getting requests to make Docker Desktop work on Linux. The most common question I get is, does it work in a VM like on Mac and Windows? And yes, it does. I actually had this conversation in our Discord server right there at devops.fan today because someone was asking about it. And basically, the idea is that the reason it's in a VM is so that you can use, there's multiple reasons, but one of the reasons I like is that you can use both the host Docker daemon, if you're able to install that, in parallel or at the same time even as the Docker desktop running in a VM. And then it also creates the exact same workflow, security boundaries, and all that stuff that those of us on Mac and Windows like. And I think that you all were saying when you announced it that that was the request you were getting from your customers, was that they really wanted the same security model, same experience.
Yeah, because then otherwise they're going to have to vet yet another process and everything else too. And then as we start to roll out features like the registry access management, hardened desktop, and these different things that we were just talking about, it's the same platform that we can build and add features to regardless of what operating system it's running on. So it allows us to iterate faster, and then we also don't have to worry about what kernel version you're using, or all those different things. It gives us a common platform across all the different operating systems to hopefully make your lives easier and let you focus more on development.
Yeah. Again, this is not designed for servers, right? Docker Desktop is for you, the human, to use on your local machine. So Docker Desktop for Linux doesn't mean you're going and installing this on Ubuntu in the cloud. It's for a GUI. But I do run it. I'm primarily Mac, but I do have Linux VMs that I run a Docker Desktop for Linux in, and it works great, and it's fun to use there. In addition to having the local Docker installed on the host. Okay, next up. The DSO website, so the Image Vulnerability Database. Now, this is something interesting where I'm going to throw the link in chat so people can explore it. They may not even know about this site. My understanding is it may not always be there. There's a future where it's going to be integrated into more of the products, and maybe doesn't make sense as a separate website. But for now, it's there. And let's talk about it. So the image vulnerability of Docker, like the way we see vulnerabilities in images, has changed a lot. Multiple times over the last 5 or so years. First we had it, then it changed, then we didn't have it on Hub, then we got it back again, but in a different form. And now we actually see it, and sorry about the noise. But now we have it in Docker Desktop, and so you have the Docker scan with Sneak in the local Docker command line. We have Docker Desktop GUI now showing us vulnerabilities in the GUI when I'm looking at my containers and images right there inside the interface and the dashboard. And now we see certain things inside of Docker Hub, like the log4shell vulnerability and some of the major vulnerabilities. We see those indicated as like this image is good, it doesn't have it anymore. But this is the site that we can nerd out on. This is like the super nerd image site. So is this just for official images?
Great question. So as of right now, the DSO website is that way. Now,
these aren't all. There's some here.
Yeah, and so this is an area that's still growing. And I'll maybe provide just a little bit of background here too. So as we talked about earlier, Docker's been growing a lot as a company, and so we've had several different acquisitions. So one of those was a company called Atomist, and so in many ways this DSO website is from that acquisition, and it's still working on being kind of folded into the main product and whatnot. But Atomist is a fantastic tool where we get to it's an event-driven data platform that helps us be able to know when container images have been pushed and updated. And okay, now let's go ahead and perform some action. Let's do a security scan. Let's check for CVs and publish them on the site here too. And so yeah, we're actively looking at how to make that available for customers to use on their own container images within their own namespaces, et cetera. So yeah, what you see here publicly are going to be the official images. And I don't think we have the verified publishers there. That's a good question. I should know the answer to that.
Well, there's a lot here. Like there's a subtle complexity to all this stuff, because you can see the base images and where the vulnerabilities come from, which layer the vulnerabilities in. You can learn about the vulnerability. Go check it out on the. And of course, this isn't the first time we've seen this. There's been lots of other tools out there, but it's nice that this is starting to show up everywhere in all the Docker tooling, so that we're always aware at the right moment. Right, that's always the trick. Mm-hmm. Knowing about the vulnerabilities in my images, in my apps, at the right moment. Obviously, we still have tools like in Visual Studio Code for scanning inside of your apps itself on the dependencies. Sneak, shout out to Sneak. They actually create a vulnerability scanner for your app code inside of it for the dependencies in there. This is more of a after the artifact's been built kind of scenario. Yep. But yeah, there's a lot going on here. We won't have time to jump all into it, but just so you know, everyone, like this website exists. Go check it out. It's for official images. And you will also start to see some of this stuff show up more in Docker Desktop and Docker Hub. So yep. I think it's great. I think security is, because I think like at the KubeCon keynote, there was a conversation from Slim, not sponsored by them, but Slim was mentioning how because of the rapid rise, we continue to have more and more vulnerabilities come to light, or become aware. We all become aware of more vulnerabilities every year. So when you look at the CVE database, each year there's more vulnerabilities than the last, at least vulnerabilities that we found. And that's the same is true for images, because images have all that same open source code. So they were just talking about how, like a node image today is going to have more vulnerabilities in it than a node image 2 years ago, even if you had the most up-to-date image at those times, just because of the rapid rise of, maybe we're just better at finding the vulnerabilities. Who knows? But there's just more to deal with. I guess that's the point. There's more to deal with. This is going to help us deal with that problem.
Yep. But, and it's still the tricky problem of, okay, what do you do with the information once you've got it? And so that there's a lot to still be done in that space of, okay, I've got this list of 50 vulnerabilities. Which of them are actually ones I need to worry about and whatnot? So there's still a lot of evolution that can and needs to happen in this space. But yeah, we're excited to start making that more accessible to developers.
Yeah. I think the core problem there is that there is so much information. There's the CVEs themselves, there's the SBOMs and the dependencies and the dependency tree, and there's just so much that it's overwhelming to the average person, just because some of this stuff is developer focused, some of this stuff is more operations focused, and it's all about, I think, whittling down the volume of information to help the person in their moment deal with that problem in their moment, rather than seeing a bunch of stuff that we're all going to ignore. Because the one thing about CVEs is it reminds me of alert fatigue with alert systems, where you just keep seeing all these vulnerabilities, and you don't know what to do about it. There's no recommendations engine that's automatically telling me all the time, hey, if you just did this, you would fix that. But that's starting to happen, and that's what I think is exciting. By the way, back on this show this year, we've had both Slim AI on, who they take your image and after it's built, and they actually remove stuff from it that they think is optional. And then the Wolfie project from ChainGuard is another episode on this show earlier this year, just like three months back, where the ChainGuard team, two of the founders, came on the show, and we talked about the Wolfie project, which is kind of a variant of Alpine that allows you to start from scratch with a more secure base image. That and I really like their idea. I really hope that project is successful, because I'm not a huge fan of Alpine. People have heard me talk about it. It has rough edges, and Wolfie tries to solve some of those while also improving the security posture and reporting SBOMs and all that stuff. They build all the dependencies themselves. They run their own package repository for APT or APK. Anyway, whole other episode, but it exists, and it's really cool stuff. So if you're interested in security, go back in the show, look for Slim, look for Wolfie, or ChainGuard is the episode, ChainGuard episode, and that'll talk even more about all this security stuff. All right, next on the list, moving Docker D image management to container D. This is sort of an internals one, a nerdy one,
Yep.
which you and I could definitely spend a whole episode talking about how we're moving to container D as more and more functionality out of the Docker engine gets basically not really ported, but we sort of swap it out for what the container D engine does because, I mean, like I said earlier, everyone go look at your Docker systems. Container D is running underneath in all cases. It's been there for many, many years because Docker created container D. It was their idea. So this is mostly about the image functionality, right?
Correct. Yep. So how we're storing, pulling, and then providing the images at runtime. Yeah, and basically how everything's being managed under the hood. Yep.
Yeah. It's actually a very low level thing that most people will not have to care about. Most Docker users will not have to care about this. But what it really means for us, the ones that are on the internal sides of it, is that it's going to allow for new functionality, right? And we're already starting to see some of that come out. But Container D has evolved and is now, in some cases, maybe a superset of what Docker did before, and Docker wants to take advantage of that, right? That makes total sense to me. So I think this is still an option inside of our Docker desktop settings.
It is, yeah. It's not the default setting right now, and there's still a little bit of work that needs to be done to get it fully working. A couple of edge use cases, that kind of stuff. But yeah, as you got pulled up there, and one thing to note too for anybody that may be watching that wants to enable this, when you turn it on, since you're swapping your image store. What that means is any of the images that you had on your previous had on your machine before you check the box to enable it, you're not going to see those images once it restarts and you start there. So you're basically starting from scratch, but those previous images are still there. So if you disable it and go back to it, you'll see all your previous images. So just be aware of that, because if all of a sudden you're like, wait, where's all my disk space? Because I checked this box, it may be in the other image store that you're not seeing there. But maybe there's I think two different things to highlight there. Container D lets us start using some pretty cool functionality, and one of them that we're looking at is again, this is pretty low level stuff, but there's a snapshotter called a StarGZ, and what that allows us to do is basically lazy initialization of the containers or the file system. So basically, we can start the container before the full image is downloaded. And it's kind of mind-boggling how it all works and everything. And images have to be kind of structured in a certain way to do it. But it, again, unlocks faster startup times and some, again, new capabilities that come along with this. And the other thing I'll mention too is the WASM integration that we were talking about earlier needs the container D integration, because it's using another container D shim and the way the images get passed around and that kind of stuff too. So again, we're already starting to build functionality on this shift, this transition. And so it's a really good thing for us.
Yeah, I think what you all were saying was that once it goes GA, this will be sort of a seamless transition for all regular Docker desktop users. They won't even really know that in the background a major piece of functionality swapped from one binary to another. But it opens up a lot of opportunities for future. I mean, this whole lazy loading thing, by the way, is like when I first read about it, I was like, this is science fiction. How does this work? Because the idea that I can run stuff before the entire image is on my system is just, it makes my brain hurt a little bit. It feels like I need to go back to like math and do some core research into exactly how images are being pulled by container D, because it is that whole star stuff is was it StarGZ?
StarGZ, yep.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. All right, slightly related to this is the last one we're going to talk about today. It's not necessarily the most amazing thing, but I am excited about it because I'm actually using it. The image rebase and basically build kit improvements. So for those that aren't aware, when you run a Docker build command, nowadays, in most cases, you are actually running the build kit version or the build kit product, which is technically the new enhanced builder for all images in Docker. If you go back 5-7 years, maybe even farther back than 5 years, but we had the original builder from Docker, which we all used with Docker build and we all knew and loved. And at some point, you may have noticed if you're running a Docker build and a version of Docker Desktop over the last few years, and then suddenly the interface looks different, and you start to see blues and different colors, and you see like the seconds happening on the right side while all this stuff is folding and happening magically on the left side. Well, that's BuildKit, and that's one of the many things it does. You can force using it with the Docker build X command, right? I think that's the Docker build X command. Docker build X build. But this Tonis and the team have continued to improve on BuildKit. And every release of BuildKit, there's like all this major stuff. And a lot of that we get to take advantage of in Docker, but I consider this advanced because I don't teach a lot of this stuff in my course because it's not something you usually use in your first 30 or 60 days of using Docker. And here, one of the two neat things that this blog post talks about is the caching. And I'll get the caching out of the way real quick, and then we'll talk about linking. So the caching backends, and in fact, I actually mentioned in our doc that there's even more coming because I think it's there's a new version of BuildKit. I have this link. Yeah, there's another version coming up that's going to add even more caching backends, including S3. I think it was Azure's built in there or something. But there's all this stuff happening in BuildKit, really just for building our images. And one of the things that I use with this caching backend is in my GitHub Actions, which also I've taught on this channel before, is when I use GitHub Actions, BuildKit builds my images. It's my favorite way to build images. And Docker has official GitHub Actions for doing so. And when you do that, you can choose to cache your layers for when you rebuild, just like on your local system, it won't have to rebuild those layers. Well, you have to store those caches somewhere. And now Docker's BuildKit functionality has an increasing number of backends you can choose. And one of the ones that Docker added recently was, I think it was in the last year, was the GitHub Actions or just the GitHub cache as the backend for my layers. What that means for me is if I enable that, by the way, all these examples are in Docker's GitHub Actions. If you go look those up, all the documentation's there. Thank you, Crazy Max, for doing a lot of that hard work. But when you do that, and now that we have all these other ones like S3 and whatnot, you can now store your image layers just like you do on your local machine, but you can store them in a central way for your CI tools. Because a lot of times CI tools aren't on just one system. They might be ephemeral servers or temporary servers, or you might be using something like GitHub Actions, public runners, and those images will get blown away. All those caches will get blown away when the server goes away. So we have to solve this problem of speed and performance in builds by storing our images in a cache centrally. And Docker BuildKit now does a lot of that stuff, and they're adding even more. So that's sort of my argument on the caching backend on why that's such a great new feature. Let's talk about the link feature real quick. I actually lost the page. But this was hard for me to understand at first. It's a feature of the Docker file that allows me to avoid rebuilding layers. How does this work?
Yeah. I mean, so in many ways, what it allows you to do is say, hey, this layer isn't dependent on the parent layers. So normally when I build a container image and I've got my Docker file and I build my container image, great. The next time I do a build, as it's going through the steps in the Docker file, the first time it hits a layer that changes, it has to rebuild all the subsequent layers. And so you basically invalidate the cache, and then you're having to rebuild everything after that. And so what link allows you to do is say, yeah, I don't actually care about all the previous layers. And so, for example, if I've got some Python code or PHP code, or I've got something that actually is complete independent of the rest of the dependencies, if my app source code hasn't changed, well, I want to reuse the layers from the last time I built, even if I change some of the underlying dependencies or packages. And so it allows me to basically reuse some of those layers without having to recompile everything. And so there's a couple examples on there. So, if I've got a base image and I'm just copying in some stuff and I just want to rebase all my layers on top of a new base image, I can use link again to be able to say, hey, I want to reuse all those previous layers, but now on top of a new base. So it opens up some pretty, again, these are advanced use cases, and you have to kind of know how your code works, and is it actually safe to reuse, or do you actually need to recompile code, or that kind of stuff. So you have to be very aware of how your application is going to work, but it opens up a lot of those pretty advanced use cases and possibilities.
Yeah, there's there's some great use cases. Like you said, this is not something that you use on day one. This is why it's also not in my course, because this is when you have established a pattern of a Docker file that you know and that you're building it, and you find yourself rebuilding it on a regular basis, and the rebuild takes some time, and not because something significant changed, like it's just because of the order of things in your Docker file. And so this to me allows me in certain cases to avoid certain steps that are unnecessary that maybe could take me, like if I have a binary, and this is actually the one example that I used it for on a project last year, I think when it first came out, or maybe it was beginning of this year. I think it was maybe a very early beta or something, and I was trying it out for a customer where they had an image that had a lot of stuff going on in it. It often would take 7 minutes to build it because it actually had to use multiple package managers, and then it had to render out a bunch of files, and then it had to download some stuff from Git and all this other stuff. So it was downloading some binaries. It was basically a website, and there were some things that needed to be in the image for people to download, and they were just binaries. Well, those binaries needed to be there, but the rest of this stuff after it didn't always need to rerun when those binaries changed. And so we just needed to download essentially and put some files in the image without affecting the rest of the image. And that would, whenever that happened, it would always cause a long cycle of having to test everything again, all this other stuff that we didn't really need because none of that stuff had actually changed. And so this was a really unique, obviously, edge case. But this saved, I don't know, an hour a day of building, just because it would be a check for us. If this happens, if the link is engaged, basically don't build the rest of this stuff. And that's pretty cool. It is a little hard to understand just because and I think that Tonis did a great job on this by showing examples of where he shows like a Go binary where if he switches the base image from his final stage and just copies in his binary, that if he just changes the from line, there's no reason to rebuild everything and recopy because, in fact, I think in his case, it's saying it doesn't even download all the layers. It just shims that in and pushes it up to registry and doesn't have to change anything. It doesn't actually have to download Alpine to rebuild if that's the only line that changed, which is pretty amazing, especially if it's a very large base image like some of my base images can be. They can be really, really big. Node.js is, for me, with my customers, notorious for being over a gig in size. So it's nice that I have to download that. Anyway, cool stuff. All right, so there is a ton, I'll be honest, there's a ton of other stuff that we did not cover in this show because it would take 3 hours. And we're already running long. So if those of you that are more interested in this, one thing that I am going to do, I think a little bit of today, I won't promise that it'll be finished today, but I'm going to update this document that we were showing everyone. I'm going to update that with some more things that I want to add in there. And we will reference this in the podcast as well and put this back into the YouTube Live so you can come back later. If you're in Discord or on my Patreon, you will also get a notification when this is finished. But if you're curious, one of the ways that I did this work to find out was kind of a lame old way of just going through the blog. So go through the Docker blog, and I was going back in time. I personally was focusing more on the engineering functional stuff, but because there is a lot of great community examples and whatnot. But if you wanted to go into either products or engineering, and you can scroll back through the year, it's staggering to me the velocity that you all have been able to get to. If you think about it, it wasn't even 3 years ago, or barely 3 years ago, that the company split and you were less than 100 employees, and now you're back up. I don't even know what you're at now. Close to 400?
We just crossed 300.
Okay,
not long ago. So
So and that means that there's more bandwidth to do so many of these things, and you all are posting. I wouldn't say you're posting daily, but there's a lot going on the blog. And it's not just Docker run features, right? It's not just Docker command line features. This is, this is like you're saying, that the Docker is trying to solve more than just container problems for developers. So this is actually pretty cool stuff. And a lot of this stuff I learned, this is how I learned too. So a lot of people want to know how I stay up to date. I just read the blog. A lot of times I'm learning for the first time something when I'm reading the blog post. So I recommend their blog. I think it's very useful for engineers. And it's how I built some of the stuff for this show.
Sweet.
Well, thanks, Michael. This has been great. that we could talk for 3 hours, but we're not. Any last minute questions? You better get them in because we're about to say goodbye. But Michael, we can find you on Twitter, on your Twitter handle below. My Twitter handle's there. His is over there. And of course, you can find him now in the Docker. Well, we've always both been in the Docker community Slack. So if you just search around for Docker community Slack, you'll find the link to get into that Slack team or work group or whatever they're calling it today. And we're both there if you want to reach out. Also on my Discord server up at the top right there, DevOps.fan. That is the Discord server where I hang out with a bunch of smart people that I ask questions of because they're all DevOps people that are doing the things that I'm not doing, so I don't know it all. Jonathan's asking, this may be a question I missed earlier. Sorry about that, Jonathan. The current status of the CSI plugin, when will it be a stable version be available? Is there any way to try it out, if possible, without breaking your local Docker installation? So I don't know how much you know about this, but I have thoughts.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think. Typically, when I hear CSI, that's going to be in swarm-based environments, and so when Docker sold off all the enterprise pieces, part of that was the maintenance and upkeep of Swarm. So Mirantis is the steward of all the Swarm-related work. And actually, here in just the last couple of weeks, they published a blog post recommitting to continuing to support and enhance the development of Swarm. So they're still committed to it. They still have a lot of customers that are using. They still see a lot of value out of it too. So unfortunately, I don't know the current status of the CSI plugin. You'd probably have to check in with the Mirantis team over there, unless you know anything different, Brett. But.
So yeah, I'm actually pulling up some stuff. So it's almost like there's someone like I swear I didn't pay Jonathan to ask this question, but I am so if we're gonna so let's back up a second. So Docker has the standard Docker volumes command, and that is only going to use it can use other things like NFS, but it mostly is used for the local storage driver, and the Kubernetes community has created this standard, the CSI standard, that a lot of the storage vendors have all moved to or are moving to. And essentially, the long story short there is that Kubernetes used to ship with a bunch of storage plugins built in, but now they're removing those from the core, and those are basically add-ons, and that's the CSI standard. And so the idea here is the Mirantis team is working on a plugin. It's actually a Docker plugin. It's not a part of the Docker binary. I actually learned a lot of this stuff just in the last week. Thanks to Drew Ernie, I'm working with the Mirantis team to see if we can't do a show early next year. We don't have a date yet, but talk about their commitment to Swarm and basically have a new Swarm show. A Swarm show is something I usually do like once a year, but there hasn't been much movement in the last couple of years. So I think the last one I did was 2 years ago. And we're going to, what we want to explore is what is their plan for this CSI plugin. So technically it would be a Docker plugin command to install their CSI plugin feature. And what that really means is then Swarm, I think in their current iteration, the only one that's supported is NFS because there are no CSI drivers yet that have made their own compatible version for Docker. But the hope is that the community will be interested in this and that storage vendors might start building their own plugins that will work with Docker and Swarm. The idea would be is once you have that Docker plugin there, that you could potentially create new types of volumes that are Swarm aware or that are off host and stored somewhere else. We've had that in years past. There's been RexRay. There's Portmax or
Portworx.
Portworx. Thank you. Portworx with an X. Yeah, and there's been a lot of storage stuff out there. The Mirantis team is trying to create sort of the next gen of that, and the first step is to create this CSI plugin. So this technically has nothing to do with Docker. Docker Inc., the company, other than them making sure that the functionality exists there so that this can be done. And I see a lot of stuff in the SwarmKit repo. Sebastian has been merging a lot of updates in there, so I don't know if we're getting ready for a new Docker release, and that maybe we're just wanting to make sure all of the packages are up to date, the Go binaries and all that are, the dependencies are up to date. But I see that happening in the Swarm repo. And like you said, Mirantis, at least twice, if not 3 times this year, has committed to maintaining the SwarmKit repo. And what the show I'm hoping to have is maybe going to break down, is the future of Swarm maybe going to be in the Mirantis runtime? Is Mirantis going to ship it as well as Docker? Are we going to use standalone? I've got a lot of Swarm fans that talk every day. In fact, just this week, we actually finally created a Swarm channel in our Discord server, because all along everyone's like, I thought you loved Swarm. Why don't you have a channel for Swarm? And I was like, well, it's the Docker channel. Like, it's just a part of Docker. But what we're seeing now is that Mirantis is sort of creating, what we always hoped all along for SwarmKit and just Swarm in general, was that it would be a community effort and it wouldn't just be Docker. That never really happened the way I think a lot of us wanted it to happen. And all of us want to see Swarm survive. All of us want to see SwarmKit still get community love, but it is an open source project and it needs that community involvement. Thank you, Mirantis, for continuing that effort. Mm-hmm. Drew is still the main developer on the SwarmKit repo and the SwarmKit integrations. So, and he's the one that made a lot of the CSI code. So we're going to try to get him on the show, maybe some more of his team members. We'll see. No promises. I'm still having conversations. But thanks, Jonathan. That's a great ask. And that's the reason we didn't have it in the show, is because nothing really happened on the Docker side this year. So there was nothing to really talk about. But Michael and I have been Swarm fans since the beginning. I mean, I was a Swarm Classic fan back before even Swarm Mode existed. So,
that's true. I didn't do much with Classic Mode, but I mean, it's interesting the number of people I still talk to that are like, I want something easier than Kubernetes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And yep, I mean, Kubernetes is great, but it's not meant for everybody. It's not meant for every team. It's not meant for every organization. And so having viable options, ECS, Swarm, Nomad, having a breadth of different options is a good thing for the ecosystem. So.
Yeah, I like it. I want more orchestrator success, more orchestrators. But obviously, we have Nomad. Someone mentioned it earlier. Nomad has been on this show. We talked about it, I think, earlier this year with Rosemary Wang a little bit. I think it was her, maybe someone else. But we've had HashiCorp on, I think, 2, if not 3 times this year, talking about their various projects. And there's a ton of Nomad community. People are very excited about that and still passionate about that product. I was always more of a Swarm person than a Nomad person. And so I'm excited to see us get some of this stuff and hopefully have it shipped in the near future. So, well, again, Mike, Jonathan, that was a great question. Yeah. Thank you so much for that final question. Michael, thank you again for being on the show. I will be live next week. Next week, by the way, actually that's the wrong one. I did this one. This week is our year in review. So this is just a Docker year in review. I had Michael on. Next week, our friends, Nirmal Mehta and Laura Taco will also be on with me. And we've done this now. I think this will be our 3rd year where we do a DevOps year in review. And we won't talk about just Docker. It'll talk about Kubernetes and all of the scope of DevOps stuff, which is vast and wide. And how do we fit all that in an hour? I don't know, but we're going to try. And so come back for that.
I may have to try to sneak into that because that's always a fun conversation. And Laura and Nirmal are great friends as well too. So I'm looking forward to that chat next week. So
yeah, it'll be great. I don't know what we're going to talk about yet, but we're going to make that plan up.
That's right.
and we'll be ready for the show next week. But for those of you just now watching, just now joining us, this is the wrap up of our stream. I'm here live every Thursday, 1 p.m. Eastern. That is UTC -5. You can, we're actually creating a calendar so that people can now subscribe to the calendar. It's not public yet, but we're going to get that out so that you can now go to my website and then see future guests, what the topics are going to be, and what past topics that we've had, and then go find those shows in YouTube, because YouTube isn't always the easiest for finding the specific video you're looking for. So that's coming up, and we got so many other shows planned for the new year. We're already booking into January, February. So please come back and hang out with us on the live show and ask questions of my guests, which is why we do this live. And of course, support us on Patreon. And then join us on the Discord server over on DevOps Fam. Right there. Well, thank you again, everyone. We'll see you next week. Ciao.